being on clinical shift in a busy emergency department, I was in red, like red levels of stress, so low line stress. But there was 1 hour in the middle of my day which was perfectly green, as in recovery. And so it stuck out like a sore thumb. And the guy who's looking at it goes, "What was happening between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock?" And I looked at my diary, and I was running a team time. I was facilitating a team time where I was facilitating and helping people and listening to people's stories. And it was just there in physiology that, storytelling is and listening to other people's stories and connecting through stories is not just good for the other people, it's good for my health too.
Welcome to What Was, What Next. This is a podcast about the seasons of change that shape our lives. I'm Hina Thacker, and in each episode, I sit down with someone who has stepped away from what once was, be it a career, a role, a relationship, an identity, and is now finding their way through the uncertain space of what comes next. These are not stories of perfect reinvention. They're honest conversations about the in-between seasons, the moments when the old life no longer fits and the new one hasn't fully formed. If you're navigating a transition of your own, you're not alone here. There are many of us who have navigated through those same waters. So let's begin the conversation for today. Welcome, Lalith.
Welcome to What Was, What Next. I would normally say that rather than me introduce anybody of a written bio sheet, I would love it if you could introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Hina. It's a pleasure to be on. So on What Was and What Next. So I'm Dr. Lalith Wijedoru, and for nearly 20 years I worked in the National Health Service. I worked as a doctor. The type of doctor I was a pediatrician, and I was the type of pediatrician who worked in an emergency department. So my last clinical job as a consultant was in an emergency department of a children's hospital. For many, many reasons, as we'll subsequently discover, I decided to have a career pivot. And what I do now is I would describe myself as a social health consultant. And social health is all about our quality of our human connections. And my modality to improve the quality and depth of our human connections, our social health, is through the use of true personal stories. So I set up a storytelling consultancy called Behind Your Mask in 2021, and I have been using stories for businesses, for individuals, for families in mainstream media to celebrate stories as a form of quality human connection.
Amazing. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. I mean, if you were at a dinner party, how do you introduce yourself now? Does the doctor still come first? Tell us.
That is such an interesting question, because what I find with doctors who do have career pivots is that they struggle with that loss of identity of being a doctor. And I think I was very different. I almost at the beginning wanted to shed my doctor skin, that I wanted to kind of really market myself as somebody who was award winning in staff engagement through the connecting power of stories. And I did my very best to downplay my doctor past. But it became very, very obvious that many people were so curious in my story about why a doctor who is at consultant level would have a career pivot. And so actually the doctor part was an important part of my story that, funny enough, I was neglecting. Now, at the beginning, I wouldn't mention it. But now it is something that I do mention. It's not at the top, but it is something that comes in the middle. I would say it was in the middle of the sandwich. And the reason why is because of this concept of social health, that actually what I'm doing now is not such a great departure from what I was doing before. As a doctor, as a pediatrician in emergency medicine, my role was to look after the physical and mental health of children, as well as understand the context of their families in this. And so, physical being your body and mental being your mind, very much that was in my remit as a doctor. But now, using stories, I am actually improving social health, which is this third neglected pillar of health, which is the quality and depth of our human connections. As a doctor, particularly working in an emergency department, looking at the human connections is not something that we have the time, energy, or resource, or perhaps even the expertise to do. But what I wanted to do with this career pivot is to take my skills of looking after physical and mental health and use it in improving social health.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Because so often I think in clinical medicine, the job is the diagnosis and the treatment. You're trained, I guess, to extract information from a patient, the symptoms, the duration, the severity, so that you can solve a problem. And it's efficient, it's purposeful. All the questions that you're asking are designed to move towards an answer. But when I used to sit in a consulting room with patients, sometimes a patient would start talking and you just find yourself actually just listening. And you're almost like you're not formulating, you're not going through your triage, you're not doing a differential diagnosis. You're actually just inside the experience with them, and they're telling you something about their life, and in your case, not just about their bodies. And your specialty was pediatrics and children, so it's your patient, but it's their families as well, you said earlier. And there's definitely a story there where the consultation stops being just a clinical transaction, I guess. And so was there a moment when you heard a story from somebody, be it a patient, a colleague, that what took you down this route? What was the seed of that?
The seed of my pursuing storytelling in reflective spaces as a way to improve connection actually came through my own adversity. So, as a doctor in training, when I was training in pediatric emergency medicine, there were many scenarios, there were many situations in my clinical work which were very emotionally challenging for me, and they were particularly around the kind of ethical dilemmas. So, just to give some three examples, they were particularly in the kind of emergency setting. So, the first was newborn intensive care. So, kind of like critically unwell newborns, including premature newborn babies, and the ethics of resuscitation in babies who had perhaps very limited quality of life or limited life expectancy. So the kind of issues around providing life sustaining treatment for those with very poor outcomes, I found very challenging from an ethical point of view. Another ethical challenge I had was in the emergency department. So, for example, prolonged resuscitations in children who will have very poor neurological outcomes. And particularly around the heroics that often happens, particularly when it comes to in children in cardiac arrest, and with the outcomes of which are often very, very poor. But the one, would I say, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was in a pediatric intensive care case of a young girl who had had a bone marrow transplant, and unfortunately the bone marrow transplant had been rejected by her body, and so she was in bone marrow rejection, and this led to like florid symptoms of rejection, which ultimately would lead that she would not survive. But doing my history with this patient, being asked to look after her, I was made to do things which I felt were morally wrong, in terms of that this child should be in palliative care rather than prolonging her life. And so, as a result of those ethical traumas, I actually had physical symptoms myself. I actually had symptoms, what I thought of a brain tumor. I had severe headaches, I had slurred speech, I had a tremor of my hand, I had personality change, and I had a maternal grandfather who died around the same age that I was at the time, in his early 40s, late 30s, of a brain tumor. And so I went to my GP thinking that I had a brain tumor. The GP examined me and actually thought that this was not a physical symptom, that this is perhaps a reaction, a stress reaction. As the arrogant doctor who had dealt with a lot of stress in their life and personally and professionally, I thought, no, 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 this can't be stress. But I listened to them and I went to occupational health. And occupational health and the therapist listened to what I was talking about and identified that actually I did struggle with these ethically challenging cases. And what this is, the diagnosis ultimately was something called moral injury or moral distress, when a healthcare professional is unable to, for whatever reason, provide the care that they want for their patients. And there are countless times for hundreds of healthcare professionals who have to encounter moral injury or moral distress. As a result of this occupational therapist, the occupational health therapist recommended that I attend something called a Schwartz round, which is in healthcare a recognized forum where staff can share the social and emotional impact of their work through stories. And so to ask, where did this seed come from? It was me going to my first Schwartz round. I sat and I listened to other people's stories about how their work affected them. I was inspired by what they said, and I volunteered for the following month to share my story. And so I shared my story about how I felt about this bone marrow transplant rejection patient. And I had a senior anaesthetist, a senior psychiatrist, and a senior surgeon approach me afterwards and say to me in their three different ways, you have articulated something that we have struggled with in our individual careers, but have never had the bravery to say out. And so when they said that, and I realized the power of stories to kind of help these emotional wounds heal, I decided to train in how to be a Schwartz facilitator. And when I became a consultant in a pediatric emergency department, I wanted to bring these skills to support the hospital team.
And how was that received then in when you wanted to do this? How was it received?
So I wasn't breaking that many barriers because this model of Schwartz rounds is already quite well established. But of course, getting it up and running locally in individual hospitals is a different story. Each trust or organization will have a Schwartz round steering committee. And in the place that I went to work, it had started and then stopped and had been lated for a while. So what I came to do was kind of restart it with the help of their local Schwarzschild committee. The pioneering groundbreaking elements came when the pandemic happened, because what normally happens, the Schwartz rounds model is very much based on an in-person, face-to-face, over lunch type of format. And so to do the similar sort of thing, creating these reflective spaces with potentially vulnerable people and vulnerable and emotionally hard-hitting stories while online, back in 2020, it was almost considered, no, 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 we can't do this. This will be very, very difficult. And so it was doing this in A&E settings, in intensive care settings, in high pressure clinical environments, that was the pushing the boundaries.
You clearly succeeded in pushing those boundaries. Yes.
I have to be clear that the Point of Care Foundation, who hold the trademark or the patent for this model of Schwartz round, they devised something called Team Time, which was an online version of a Schwartz round. But instead of being for an entire organization, they designed it specifically for individual teams, like an emergency department.
Yeah.
And the clinical psychologists behind this, of course, were naturally cautious because they'd not done this model of online reflective spaces before. And so they were quite cautious about doing it in these high pressure environments. But I ignored that advice. I wanted to do this where it was needed, which was included in intensive care and A&E. And so I think I pushed the boundaries by pushing the format in places where it had not originally been intended.
Well, that's just so fascinating. I want to bring up a story that I heard about you. Did you sign up for a trial or something and you were wearing a monitor for 18 hours? Would you mind sharing that? Because that, to me, it seemed like a key moment.
It definitely was a key moment. So NHS Northwest Leadership Academy had put out some emails about how to support staff well-being during the pandemic. As you can imagine, staff well-being became a priority given that significant healthcare crisis. And they put out a grant for something called Perform at Your Peak. And Perform at Your Peak was provided by an external provider called Optima Life. Optima Life, what they did was they were very interested at looking at stress in the workplace and to improve team performance. And what they used was they used this heart monitor called First Beat, which is a Finnish tech company, which was used by elite athletes to monitor them in terms of their stress and physical recovery. So periods of rest, periods of exercise, periods of recovery, and to see what things very much helped them recover from stressful periods. And so this organization was using this in the NHS to help staff identify what were the things that stressed them, the stressors, and what were the things that energized them, as in what periods of recovery. And the way that they did this was to use the heart monitor to measure what's called heart rate variability. And there are certain parameters that this is a good heart rate variability, which will lead to better cardiovascular recovery or stress recovery. And so I applied for this grant and managed to get and was successful to say I'd like to do this in the emergency department. And so I then identified different staff members from different parts, from reception to the porters to housekeeping to the nurses, to the doctors, junior doctors, senior doctors, and different levels of within the department just to see what would happen. And we were required to wear these heart monitors for 5 consecutive days, both at home and at work. And you were supposed to keep an online diary to say what we were doing, meal times, what we were doing on our shifts, etc., etc. And then once we got the data and posted it back to the company then had one-on-one meetings with us to kind of show us our data. And it showed us our data and then tallied it with the online diary that we were doing. So on day 3, I can't remember, of my 5-day period, I did yoga in the morning, I did some exercise, I walked to work, I was then on shift, and then I went home. So it kind of showed my sleep patterns, my exercise and things. And so, of course, during my being on clinical shift in a busy emergency department, I was in red, like red levels of stress, so low line stress. But there was 1 hour in the middle of my day which was perfectly green, as in recovery. And so it stuck out like a sore thumb. And the guy who's looking at it goes, "What was happening between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock?" And I looked at my diary and I was running a team time. I was facilitating a team time where I was facilitating and helping people and listening to people's stories. And it was just there in physiology that, storytelling is and listening to other people's stories and connecting through stories is not just good for the other people, it's good for my health too. And
Yeah.
so, again, this whole concept about social health, physical and mental health, but the quality of human connections and periods where you connect with other people can be good for stress recovery too.
Yeah, amazing. Totally on board with that. So with that scenario in mind then, if I know you work in the corporate environment as well, and we're going to get to that in more detail, but if a leader came to you, not with a story, but just with a silence or with a feeling that they just couldn't explain, but they were sat in front of you. We've come across those people in the coaching world who know that there's something they just don't know. Their words have run out. What would you do with that?
See, I'm somebody who's very comfortable with silence. And I know that I would want to sit with that silence. I would sit with that silence very much so, because eventually a word will come out. Whatever meager few words that come out, those words are significant. And I would probably take one of those words, whatever word that it will eventually, it might take 10, 20, even half an hour for somebody to come up with a word of how they're feeling or what they're experiencing. And if we just run with that word and just dissect it, I think a story would emerge eventually.
I'm going to give that a go. As again, when you're used to talking with patients, it was very difficult at the beginning when I entered the world of coaching to sit in the silence with somebody. There's an art to it, I think. So you've had this shift in your career focus, and healing, I guess, in medicine has a direction. You're heading towards some numbers, some parameters, something concrete, the patient getting well, and you're trying to restore something, you're trying to restore health. In the businesses that you work with, what's the equivalent? What are you actually trying to restore with some of the the work that you're doing currently in businesses for businesses?
So I think in businesses or organizations, the keywords that I would say are culture. What is the culture of your organization? And so much of what I call the employee life cycle, as in like from applying to a company and promotion and reward and recognition and learning and development, all of the different stages of the employee life cycle are so much pervaded by culture, by the company or organizational culture. And very much aligned to an organizational culture is engagement. The engagement of the people who work there. And so when businesses want to know what the benefits are in terms of why do we need to improve human connection, why is storytelling and creating these reflective spaces and the use of stories and employee stories and leader stories, why are these important? I say one is about engagement of staff and the second is about improving workplace culture. People leave businesses because of culture. Staff engagement is directly related to your bottom line. So why so but of course, but so many businesses forget staff engagement and forget organizational culture in their pursuit of getting a better bottom line. But they need to realize is that they need to invest in culture and invest in engagement in order to improve that. Because if you just drive people like machines, actually that is not a good culture and is going to drive down your engagement rather than drive it up. So I think what people are looking for is a more humanized, connected work culture. They are looking for leaders who have skills, skills of empathy, of listening, of compassion. They're looking for compassionate leadership. They're looking for leaders who are human and who can be authentic and vulnerable. So creating work cultures which have that, which embody this, I think will ultimately drive up staff engagement and that will make you worry less about your bottom line.
Yeah, I think, that is so true, isn't it? That a few years ago, it was very much the whole engagement piece was buy them a coffee or,
Give them yoga.
yeah, it was literally like very superficial is the only, is the best way. But actually, when you go deeper with stories, with actually showing the people that you work with that you genuinely care. When I started work, you were told to leave your problems at the door and not bring them to work with you. And when you try and do that, it's just not possible because you're not bringing your whole self to the conversation. So it sounds like what you're doing enables organizations to almost allow their employees to bring their whole self.
It's about being human. Let's be clear. Like, we could work, you could still be the chief finance director, but you still might be suffering bereavement of your mother. And that could be anybody in the department. I can talk about one story which is coming up for a tech company. A woman will be talking about her struggles with infertility and how she struggles in the workplace when everyone is asking about children or she's going to baby showers. It's challenging. And so to talk about that honestly could be both it could be both engaging in terms of it can be therapeutic for that person. It can be educational for other people who probably had no idea, not just about that person, about how to approach these delicate questions about do you have any children, that type of thing. So there are so many reasons why stories, as a human form of as a very basic form of human communication, can improve engagement and culture.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to ask you, so obviously successful as a medical doctor, successful as a storytelling coach, facilitator. But what about the season in between? If I may ask you, how did it go down when you communicated the fact that you were having this career change? How did that go down with people, your work colleagues for a start?
Oh goodness, the one that will last forever is one of my A&E consultant colleagues. She said to me, "You are going to end up homeless selling the big issue." Is what she said to me. I laughed. Honestly, some people would think that was insulting, but I saw it as a challenge, like, I'll show you. And don't get me wrong, starting up from scratch, starting up a business, somebody who has no business expertise, no idea about social media. I nearly soiled my trousers when I did my first tweet,
Yeah.
because, I'm just not that person. I'm not a social media person. I barely I use Facebook as like a directory of my friends and colleagues and put the occasional picture up and, that type of thing. I had no idea about sales, about marketing, about tax, about none of this. I didn't have any idea. But what I did know was that I was passionate about what I wanted to do. And so the response from my colleagues, particularly medical colleagues, was, you're going to be this is going to be very dangerous financially. And it is true. It very, very much was. The other response I got from medical staff was, you are so brave. There was this,
Mm.
they admired the courage to actually make the decision to do it. I actually met somebody I was examining at the General Medical Council about 2 years later, and I shared my story at an online Schwartz round about my decision to leave my medical career and to start up this business. And a lady who I met 2 years later, met me at the General Medical Council. And she goes, "Oh my goodness, I cried when I heard your story. I had no idea. No, I'd never met this woman before." And she goes, "I cried when I heard it because the conviction that you had just showed a strength of character and a bravery that perhaps I don't have in myself," is what she
Yeah.
said. So
Yeah.
again, like, stories can hopefully be inspiring. So yes, you're brave, you're crazy. There was a cohort of my friends who were saying, "This is you.
Hmm.
You can see that you'll be using your talents in a different way." So there was a sense of encouragement. But don't get me wrong, financially, it was very difficult. Like, starting a business from scratch with no leads or no links or nothing. You just have to network and put yourself out there and do stuff. And of course, I made mistakes. I subcontracted my social media because I was so frightened of doing social media to somebody else. And one of my friends who worked in PR in Glasgow, he saw what was coming out from the person that I'd subcontracted out with, and he sat me down and gave me some tough love. And he says, "Mate, your stuff is SHIT,
Yes.
and I can't believe somebody as eloquent and articulate as you is
Yeah.
subcontracting this out." And I nearly cried because I was just like, because I don't know how to do it. He goes, "What don't you know how to do? You know how to
Mm.
speak. You know how to write. You're engaging. Do it." So
Mm.
again, sometimes you do need that kind of mirror held up to you and to point you in the right direction. And I hope that anybody listening who is thinking about doing this is that you are going to make mistakes. You are going to learn things the wrong way, but learn, shift, readjust, and move. Keep
Yeah.
moving. That's
Yeah.
what I had to do. And I have
Yeah.
learned things about tax and social media and networking and marketing that I would never have done as a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. And agreed, there's so many skills that you have to learn as an entrepreneur that as a clinician would never enter your sphere. And what I love about what you've just said, though, is that you had friends that said you were brave. You had friends that said, "What are you thinking?" And you had friends that once you'd gone out, they sat you down and said, "This is not you." And I love that because you need those people around you, don't you? You need that cohort, that inner circle that does help you along as well. They're not always cheering you on because they might not agree with your decision, but they're still there for you and look out for you. What about family? Because a doctor, come on, is everything.
So my situation is a bit complicated because I'm actually estranged from my family. So I actually have no contact with my family, but
Okay.
I can imagine, and I'm sure they must know because they must see stuff on social media. So I have a very complex relationship with my family, and it was actually pre-pandemic that I actually, distanced and walked away from my biological family. But I'm sure through the ether, if you just Google me now, like, if anybody in my family just Google me, they would see a completely different side, and
Yeah.
it's very clear that I've had a career pivot. To the honest answer is I have no idea what they
Mm.
say. But interestingly, my niece, so my second brother's eldest daughter, who at the time that I distanced myself from the family was barely in secondary school, is now, a 19-year-old, has now found me on Instagram and has said, "I'm loving all the storytelling." But she wrote something, which again, I absolutely did not script her for this. But she said something which, again, is very much aligned to what I think about social health and things. She goes, "I love seeing things every time you say something on storytelling that comes on my feed. Whenever she wrote, I love the work you're doing with storytelling. Whenever a post comes up on my page, it feels so healing. Oh, and that's my niece who's found me on Instagram and's clearly seen the stuff I've done. And so again, the junior generation, I'm not sure what they think, but the elder generation, I have no idea. But I'm pretty sure it's a what the hell is he thinking?
Sometimes we've got to, I think it's so important that we do follow our heart, and this is clearly, I mean, you light up. This is not a video podcast, but you light up when you're talking about your work now. So that is amazing to see. If I could ask you then, so you've moved from a room, let's say, of people who are unwell, physically sick, and you've moved to rooms where people see themselves as in this race, corporate race and KPIs and all of that. What do you think the two rooms have in common?
I think the things that they have in common is the humanity.
Mhm.
A mother who is frightened seeing their child having an asthma attack can be the same, but it could be fear of loss or fear of something terrible happening, could be the same fear of me coaching an executive who has to fire half of his staff because of a financial downturn. It's a different type of fear. It's a different type of context. And so I think that the commonality is the human emotion. So, regardless of what sphere I work in, what sector I work in, there will always be these human emotions. There will be joy, there will be fear, there will be anxiety, there'll be joy, there'll be so many, there'll be apprehension, there'll be so many emotions, but it's just the context. The context is different. And when I help somebody somebody through their story, it is a one-on-one consultation. So it's no different from dealing with a patient. I listen to them, I ask a series of questions, and we engage in a conversation. There's a bit of back and forth, and they hopefully feel safe enough to share their emotions with me. So the framework is the same.
Mm.
But as you beautifully said, my focus is not coming up with answers. My focus is to listen. My, dare I say, quote unquote, answers are suggestions on how to frame the story.
Yeah. 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 I have this thing that I keep on returning to for myself, having gone through a career transition as well, is that I feel like when I sit in that silence with myself, I am returning to inner wisdom. I hope that doesn't sound arrogant. It's not that I know, but often we do have the answers within us, don't we? And we just need somebody to pull them out.
So I talk about what I do is reflective storytelling. And it's essentially where you take any word, any theme, any scenario, and you tell the story. And I am somebody who is external. I'm getting stories from strangers in the same way that you get from a patient. But then all I do, again, is almost in a coaching style, is reflect what I've just heard. And sometimes when you reflect that back, as you say, the answers or the light bulbs or those light bulb moments start to come. And it's not because I have told them anything. I've just reflected what they have said to me. And so, yes, absolutely. Reflective storytelling can be very, very insightful if you are prepared to speak your truth.
So, on that note of speaking your truth, what do you still wrestle with in this? Do you think the career transition, have you made the switch from what was to what next? And what do you wrestle with still privately, if you don't mind sharing?
My main wrestling thing is financial.
Mm.
Of course, because, I left although I worked very hard as a senior doctor, financially receiving a wage, salary every month, for my whole working career, thus far, it was something that you took for granted. And so, of course, there will be times, particularly as an entrepreneur in the early stages, where that income is not regular and where it'll be feast or famine and you get a big contract and then you won't get a bit. And so it's always the worrying where the next business or the next thing is going to come from. And so that is my main struggle. It's the kind of maintaining financial stability. And I'm still, I'm a solopreneur. I am a business all by myself. Contract accountancy to somebody. I contract some videography work and some insurance work, of course, and my website design. So those are things I subcontract out, but essentially it is me. I am the business. And so, of course, there is a great pressure on me to deliver constantly and to grow. And I have no desires for this massive expansion and a massive building with 20,000 employees. That is not my thing. I want to be able to provide a personalized bespoke services to individual people within organizations and for individuals and for families. And so it's the financial. That's the main struggle, like thinking about how can I grow this to a point where it becomes financially sustainable. And I'm still in the growth phase. I'm still in the first 5 years as a business, so I've still got a way to go.
So in that growth phase then, what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself in how you're dealing with those concerns that an entrepreneur has? And what might, I know you said you never give people the answers in the sessions that you have with them, but what could you say to somebody listening that might help them if they're currently finding themselves in that similar space?
I think the thing is tenacity. You've got to be tenacious about this, that you will face a lot of rejection in the beginning. So again, like as a doctor, I had people
Yeah.
banging down my doors for my services. We
Yes.
want you to teach. We want you to write this grant. We
Yes.
want you to see patients, you know.
Yes.
And then you go to from that to you having to bang down people's doors to say, pay me for my services. Well,
Mm.
first of all, are you interested? Will you listen? Will you sign a contract? Will you pay me? There's that whole journey. And that journey can take a long time from your
Mm.
first lead, from the first introduction. And so again, don't want people to think that from meeting somebody to receiving money for your business, delivering the service and receiving money for it, that it's going to be this nice, short, linear phase. It ain't. It's going to be long. And this lead or lag time can be months, in some cases years. And so my thing is, don't be disheartened for the lack of activity, but be consistent in raising your profile. I am unashamed. And it's funny, relative of your brother once used your brother used the word besharam to describe me, in terms the Gujarati word for shameless. And he said, and I am shameless in promoting myself, in being open and authentic and vulnerable, because that is what you need to be. There is no such thing as bad publicity. Just keep going, raise your profile, use social media, do things for free at the beginning to raise your profile. It's just to give an example, within the NHS, I started working as a volunteer, sharing stories of my patient experience, of my clinical experience for NHS Leadership Academy. And people started noticing that I was delivering impactful stories. And then eventually I asked, well, if you like what I do, could I do something bigger? Then they put me onto the NHS Graduate Management Training Scheme, where I delivered
Mm.
workshops around storytelling for mental health and well-being. And that led somebody on that course became a finance director in the southeast of England. And then they commissioned me paid job to do a mental health workshop around storytelling. So from doing unpaid work, raising my exposure,
Yeah.
providing proof of concept, to then leading to that big workshop. After that, I was then pushed up to NHS Leadership Academy, and I got a substantial contract in terms of delivering stuff to aspiring chief execs. And yeah, so I just want to use that as an example of,
Yeah.
grab opportunities. This is what growth mindset is. Growth mindset is, don't limit yourself. Grab an opportunity and run with it. Some things will work, some things will fall flat in their face, but something will sprout.
Yeah. It's as you were saying that and the word shameless, and I love etymology. And are you aware, I mean, possibly not, but are you aware of the etymology of the word shameless?
No, no.
So shameless, shame traces back from the Proto-Germanic word skamo, which originally meant a painful emotion associated with embarrassment,
Mhm.
right? And then it went through a positive thing where it actually was associated with describing somebody who was blameless or free from disgrace. But the point is, when we talk about pursuing something because of your belief in it, that it is doing good, not only for you, but for the wider world out there, then I think there should be no embarrassment. Do you know, going back to its original, there should be no embarrassment about it because it is the right thing to do.
It's interesting. When you said the word embarrassment, I was thinking about why are people reticent about promoting themselves? It's
Mm.
because they are embarrassed. And I think they're embarrassed and they fear judgment because, as in many cultures, if you shout about yourself, if you big yourself up, if you sell your things like that, it's a like wind your neck in, get over yourself, don't be such a narcissist or self-promotion.
Yeah.
And again, as doctors, we have that internal sort of arrogance and confidence about us, given the competitiveness of our profession. But there will always be that criticism of the one who's like, oh, that one is,
Yeah.
a bit more
Yeah.
self. So there is an embarrassment about self-promotion, I think. That's what it is. Whereas I'm saying if I don't self-promote, I have no business.
Yeah.
And if I
Yeah.
have no business, I have no income. And so that's what, but to go with what you were saying, Hina, is there shouldn't be embarrassment because the why of my business, I feel, and should be for everybody, compelling.
Yes.
And so if you are compelled and you believe in why you're doing what you're doing, then as you say, there should be no embarrassment. But it's also that kind of, it's the self, it's the promotion of self that I think is the embarrassment. That's my assumption.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I just think there's something along the lines of there's a light within us, and it's not that that light is kind of a spotlight on us to say, hey, look at me, but it's a light within us to create lightness for the people that see that light. I don't know if I've articulated that well enough, but if you shine bright, if you light up within yourself like a lighthouse, the lighthouse has to light up in order to protect the ships from the rocks, in order to shine a path. The lighthouse is a very important symbol for me personally, because I had this thing about, oh no, don't look at me kind of thing. But actually, if the work that you're doing is going to light something up for somebody else, then we should be shameless and Bisharam in promoting it.
I had a South Asian client who I was working with their organization using storytelling. And when I was engaging with them, I gave them some example. I sent them a podcast where I was a guest on, similar to yours, which was called Mental Health, My Family and Me, where I spoke about the challenging relationship I had with my father as somebody who was emotionally dysregulated as a parent. And this lady sent it to her husband, who was, again, a South Asian male of a similar sort of age. He said told his wife, he said that it amazes him that somebody else who has been through something similar to him has had the courage to say something like this on a national podcast. And so again, like what you said, I use the word vessel. If I can be a vessel or an inspiration to somebody to say that this could be a benefit, then I do need to be unashamed of my darkness, the uncomfortable stuff as well as the joyful stuff. And something that I very much pride myself on is that I'm somebody who is unashamed about speaking the uncomfortable truth. And so if I can talk about childhood abuse, parental mental health, those slightly unsavory topics, and sharing my truth, hopefully it can enlighten or illuminate paths or issues for people who have either been through it or for those who have no idea about it.
Yeah. And knowing that you're not alone, sometimes just that is enough, isn't it, to set you on your own path of healing.
And so much of the work that I do is I very much market myself as somebody who loves and is honored to get the stories out of people and package it and promote it in a way that suits them and the people around them. But of course, in order to engage people in my ability to do this, I have to share part of myself. Because if I can't do it, how can I expect others to? So I need to demonstrate part of my story. So going back to one of your original questions about my doctor background, my transition from doctor to storyteller is an important part of my story.
Absolutely. I think that healing has many forms and many vessels, many ways, and you have tapped into another extension of it.
Put that on my website, from healing through medicine to healing through stories.
Amazing. I think that's a very good spot to kind of bring the conversation to a close. I could talk to you forever and a day, and I may have to offline, but Thank you so much. Is there any thought that you want to leave the listener with?
The thought I would like to leave a listener with is always remember the why of your business. And it's amazing how many whys of businesses are adversity. That many people, and it reminds me of a quote from a film called Fly Me to the Moon, which stars Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum about the moon landings in the 1960s. And the Channing Tatum character says, it's our sad stories that will want us to make the world a better place. And so if we think about the whys of why do we do what we do, they often come from a place of adversity. And I would encourage people to not be afraid of our adversity and not be ashamed of our past or our previous traumas, and use that as a force for good.
Thank you so much, Lalith, and we will bring the conversation to a close for now.
Thank you so much for listening to What Was, What Next. Every story that we share here is a reminder that life moves in seasons and that the space between what was and what comes next is not a failure, but part of the journey. So if this conversation resonated with you, please do share it with someone who might need to hear it as well. Until next time, take care of yourselves in whatever season you're in. And remember, the season that makes no sense today may be the one that shapes the future for you. So embrace it in all its glory. Till next time.